Howdy y'all, and welcome to this special April outlook. Hard to believe we're already in the month of April already. Where's the time go? But before we get into what we could expect for the month ahead, please take this forecast with a grain of salt, as anything over a week out is virtually impossible to forecast, as we cannot accurately predict the future. Now, before we get into the weather models and my bold prediction, analog gear, and some facts and folklore, here are some key factors that are going to be influencing our weather for the month of April. Now, don't worry, I'm not going to overcomplicate this or anything. As we take a look at the INSO pattern, looks like we're going to be fading out of La Niña and into INSO neutral, which means basically cold Pacific water is going to be warming pretty quickly, which is going to let high pressure build for more warmth. Now the QBO plays a little bit of a lesser role in our spring weather. It plays more of a role in our winter weather more than it does our weather in springtime, but as you can see here, it can weaken down the polar vortex, but it can still make the jet stream wavier for more up and down swings, which means a more active severe weather pattern. Now next we got the solar cycle, which is going to be in cycle 25, which is going to be peaking. Now I know this sounds a little bit funny, but it is realistic, as it does play a role in storm variability, as we're going to be having more solar flares for the month of April. Now the NAO, basically, so the North Atlantic Oscillation, it flips around for the month of April. It's not really the main player though, so really it's nothing to worry about. Just like the QBO, mainly it plays a role in our winter weather. Breaking this down more in depth in my winter outlook, by the way, in October. Now the AO, also a little bit more confusing, but basically may go negative, which means that cooler air to the north could be possible. Now the NJO is unclear at this point, no strong push. And I did go ahead and take a look at all the models, and they all do agree that the ridge is going to be pushing temperatures higher, which means less storms in the west, but that don't mean that the east is going to be quiet, because as you can see here, could be dealing with a wetter east and a drier west, which means that basically we could be dealing with an active month of April. But we'll still take a look at all of the weather models, the weekly models and the monthly models, and give y'all a summary of what I could expect with a bold prediction here in a little bit. But as you can see, the experts at the National Weather Service are saying that above normal temperatures could be expected for much of the country, hence the strong ridge, which means a warm blanket over much of the country, which means a wetter east and a drier west. So before we get into the weather models, here's an illustration of the INSO phase that we'll be in for the rest of this year. Now this is subject to change, obviously. As you can see, we're transition from La Niña to INSO neutral is expected for the month of April. And INSO neutral is going to be expected from May through July, which is a 55% chance, which is a pretty good chance of being an INSO neutral all the way into the middle of summer. Now from June to August, we could be into El Nino, which is a 62% chance, and this is going to be persisting all the way through the end of the year. So that means we could be dealing with El Nino in fall and especially into wintertime, and this could mean that we could be dealing with a pretty warm and pretty quiet winter as well. But of course, I'll be breaking down my winter outlook in October with my little persimmon seeds, as well as those were actually pretty accurate this winter, surprisingly, and we'll see what those bring here in the fall time. So now that I covered all the key factors, let's go ahead and get into the weather models. And then I'll give you my prediction of what we could expect. Now, as far as the weather models go, we're going to take a look at all of the weekly models, which include the GEFS, Euro Weeklies, CSV2, which is my favorite model, the CMC, which is my least favorite model, but I'm not going to be biased here. And then we have the monthly models, which include the Euro Seasonal, which typically has a warmer bias, CSV2 Seasonal, and CanSIP Seasonal, which this model typically is in alignment with what the experts at the Climate Prediction Center and National Weather Service have to show us. At first, we're going to take a look at the GEFS, and when referring to these models, we're going to take a look at the temperature anomalies and precipitation anomalies, if I didn't make that clear. Now, according to the GEFS, looking like the beginning of the month is going to start off on a warm note for really much of the country, unless you live up here in the Pacific Northwest, far northern plains, a little bit of the upper Midwest, Great Lakes, and Northeast. But it's looking like to start off April, it's looking like much of the country is going to be starting off on a warm note. Now watch as we head into the middle of the month. It's going to be changing drastically. As you can see, the Northeast, a little bit of the East Coast, Great Lakes coming in on a below average pattern, while the rest of the country is heading into an above average pattern, which just could mean an active weather pattern as we head into the middle of the month, by the way, as we're going to be going back and forth on temperatures, which could mean some severe weather here in the middle of April. And typically April is peak severe weather season, if I didn't make that clear already as well. And once we head into the end of the month, looks like much of the same story though. A little bit more below average temperatures expected here in the Ohio Valley and here in Kentucky and Tennessee as well. But overall, much of the country is looking to be above average for the month of April. And of course, the further this goes out is through April 29th. Don't worry, the rest of the models go all the way out through May. So what about the Euro weeklies? We all know, if y'all been watching for a while, that the Euro likes to show us a little bit of a warmer bias. But see, as we head into the beginning of April, much of the country is going to be warmer than average, just like what the GEFS was showing us, with the Northwest being a little bit below average, as well as up here in the Northeast. But it's looking like a little bit of the Northern Plains is going to be heading into a little bit above average temperatures. Stark contrast between this and the GEFS, but overall, start off April, both the GEFS and the Euro weeklies is showing much of the country heading into an above average trend. Now, what about the middle of the month? Well, they're showing us once we head into right around April 14th, going to be heading into a little bit of a below average trend here in the Northwest, a little bit of a mixed bag here in the Rockies. Southwest is going to be above average as well as here in the Central Plains, but it's looking like here in the eastern part of the country from the Ohio Valley into the Northeast could be heading into a below average trend, which could mean an uptick in severe weather for the month of April, at least if we stick with the Euro. Now, what about the end of the month? Well, it's looking like more of the western part of the country could be heading to a cooling trend, as well as here out east, still remaining in a cooling trend, but the central part of the country is looking to remain above average. Now, if we push off into May, just to give y'all a preview here, it's looking like May could start off on a cool note for much of us anyways. So basically, beginning of the month and middle of the month could be warmer than average for much of us, but as we head into the end of the month, could head into a cooling trend for the eastern and western part of the country if we stick with the Euro weeklies anyway. Now, what about the CSV2? This is my favorite model, but I'm not going to be biased. And you can see why this is my favorite, because you can see clearly where the above and below average temperatures are going to be at. And you can see all of the weekly models are in agreement so far by showing that much of the country is heading into an above average trend as we head into the beginning weeks of April, unless you live up here in the Northwest and very far northern parts of the Northeast and a little bit of the Northern Plains as well. Now, what about the middle of the month? Well, this is when things change with all of the models. So you can see, really, it's been pretty consistent here in the central part of the country, as it's showing above average temperatures here in the central part, but the CSV2 is showing below average temperatures here in Texas. I would be in disagreement with this. I don't think this is going to be the case, but you never know. That's why I put the disclaimer at the beginning of the video that really anything over a week out is impossible to forecast. Please take this with a grain of salt, but really it's looking like the West Coast is going to be a mixed bag. East Coast be below average. That's been pretty consistent, but the central part of the country is going to be above average for the middle of the month. It's been pretty consistent as well with all the weekly models anyway. Heading to the end of the month, this has been pretty consistent as well. Eastern part of the country, western part of the country below average, but central part of the country going to be above average. So that's been pretty consistent anyway, and I would be in agreement with that. Now on to my least favorite model. Again, I'm not going to be too biased here, but I'm going to take a look at the CMC here. You can see all the models have been in agreement with much of the country heading into an above average pattern for the beginning weeks of April, unless you live up in the Northwest, Northeast, and Northern Plains. Heading to the middle of the month, right around the 14th time frame, central part of the country is above average. That's been pretty consistent. Western part of the country below average. Eastern part of the country below average. Northern Plains below average as well. This has been the only part that differs between all the weekly models, but overall, it's looking like all of the weekly models agree with one another, which, as I did show y'all in the key factors earlier, all models are in agreement with one another, which is actually pretty rare to see, actually. Now, as we head into the end of the month, this is when things change by a little tad anyway. More of the Northern Plains could be heading into an above average trend, while the East and West is going to be well below average. I would say, in my opinion, I think much of the country is going to be above average. Could head into a volatile temperature pattern though, which could result in an active month of April as far as severe weather goes here out east. And keep in mind, we can come in on snowfall here in April here out east, so don't let your guard down. We could come in on that, hence why there's below average temperatures. That's been pretty consistent within all the weekly models. So basically, the West Coast, I think it's going to be a mixed bag out there. I think one week's going to be warm, next week's going to be cold, but overall it's going to be above average for out there. Central part of the country is going to be above average overall. Eastern part of the country, I think it's going to be a little bit cooler than normal, but let's go ahead and take a look at what the monthly models have to show us here. If y'all been watching a while, y'all know the Euro seasonal loves to show us a warm bias, as shown here. You can see much of the country's heading into a warmer than normal trend, although there's a little bit more whites on the map than normal, which means either above or below normal. Now the CSV2, I'm a little biased towards this one, but we can see much of the country is in a warmer than normal pattern, unless you live out in the northern plains. And it's a little bit of a mixed bag here in the West Coast and below average here in Texas. Now this is the only part I would disagree with the CSV2. Because as we take a look at the CanSIPs, this one typically follows what the experts have to show us at the Climate Prediction Center, with much of the country showing above average temperatures, unless you live up in the Northeast and very far northern plains. So I'm in alignment with this pretty much for the month of April. And as we take a look at the experts at the Climate Prediction Center, they're showing us much of the country heading into an above average pattern, unless you live up here in the Northeast, Great Lakes, upper Midwest, and very far northern plains, a little bit of the Northwest as well. So if I'd have to choose, I would be in agreement with this, as it's looking like much of the country is heading into a warmer than normal April, although here out east we could head into a roller coaster ride of temperatures, as one week we could be very, very warm, and then the next week we could be very, very cold, where basically one week we could be dealing with severe weather, the next week we could be dealing with snowfall. You never know. Typical springtime weather pattern here out east. Now, as far as the western part of the country goes, I think it's going to be well above average out there. Although I think there could be a mixed bag out there, but I think overall, I think it's going to be remaining above average out there. Now, as far as precipitation goes, we'll get in that in a little bit, but I did put that it's going to be drier than normal out there, so not very active out there, at least compared to the eastern part of the country, but let's go ahead and get into that. And just like before, we're going to take a look at all the weekly and monthly models, starting off with the GEFS. And as we can see here, starting off the month of April, we can see much of the country actually starting off on a dry note, unless you live up here in Upper Great Lakes, Ohio Valley, Northeast. Head into the middle of the month, we could be heading into a soggy pattern here out east, which could result in some severe weather, because as I showed earlier on the temperature maps, that basically we're going to be in a volatile temperature pattern where one week we're going to be really, really warm, and then the following week we're going to be very, very cold. So violent temperature swings like that usually result in severe weather, and you can see we're going to be in an above average precipitation pattern as we head out of the beginning of the month and into the middle of the month. But you can see the West Coast is going to be remaining dry. Central part of the country is sort of a mixed bag. We can see head into the middle and end of the month, sort of a mixed bag here in the central and eastern part of the country, which I would say the eastern part of the country is leaning above average, while the West Coast is going to be heading into a drying pattern. Now, what about the Euro weeklies? Well, starting off the month of April, pretty consistent with what the GEFS was showing us, with the Ohio Valley, Great Lakes, Northeast being above average, with the Southeast, Deep South, and really the rest of the country starting off on a dry note. Now, what about the middle of the month? Well, you can see clearly here that the eastern part of the country is coming in on a well above average precipitation pattern, which is definitely going to result in some severe weather potential with such violent temperature swings, as I said earlier. But it's looking like the rest of the country is heading into a below average precipitation pattern. And once we head into the end of the month, of course, more whites on the map, more uncertainty, but I think overall, eastern part of the country is heading into an above average precipitation pattern, while the West Coast is going to be a little bit drier than normal. Now, this is not a bias of mine, as I showed on the key factors earlier. Wetter east, drier west. Been pretty consistent here so far. Now, what about the CSV2? My favorite model, but of course, I'm not going to be biased here. So you can see, starting off the month of April, stark contrast between the Euro weeklies and GEFS, as it's showing much of the central and eastern part of the country in a drying trend, while the western part of the country is sort of a mixed bag, but leaning above average. Now, what about the middle of the month? Well, been pretty consistent with the rest of the models, as it's been showing that the central and a little bit the eastern part of the country coming in on an above average note, while the West Coast is going to be in a little bit of a drying pattern, which could mean that the western part of the country could start heading into worsening drought conditions out there. Because if we take a look back at the drought map on March 26th, we can see much of the Rockies is in some sort of pretty bad drought conditions. As we click on this here and show y'all, see pretty bad drought conditions out there in the Rockies. So unfortunately, it's looking like the drought could worsen out there, unfortunately. So keep in mind, these are long range models. Please take them with a grain of salt, though. It can and will change between now and then. But according to the models here, looking like going to be below average, although here in Colorado could be leaning above average for the middle of the month. Heading to the end of the month, so only change between this and the rest of the models. Looks like most of the country is heading into an above average trend. That's why I said earlier that please take this with a grain of salt, because one model will show us very, very dry conditions here out west. Then another model run will show us it's going to be very, very wet. So really to be determined, but my best guess is overall the western part of the country is going to be drier than normal, while the eastern part of the country is going to be a little bit wetter than normal. That's my guess anyways. So take that for what it is. Now onto the CMC here, my least favorite model, but of course not going to be biased like I said earlier. Now it's looking like all the models are in agreement for the beginning of April, as it's looking like the western part of the country is going to be drier than normal, while the Ohio Valley, Northeast Great Lakes heading into an above average trend to start off April. Heading to the middle of the month, same story. It's looking like much of the eastern part of the country is heading into an above average trend. Could mean uptick in severe weather here in the middle of the month, while the western part of the country is going to be drier than normal. And you can see why this is my least favorite model. It doesn't really show anything very clearly at all, except for here out east. I mean, we can see here at the end of the month, more uncertainty, but still, I would say the eastern part of the country is going to be above average, while the western part of the country is going to be drier than normal. Now, what about the monthly models? Well, we take a look at the Euro seasonal. We can see that the eastern part of the country is going to be above average, while the western part of the country is going to be drier than normal. Equal chances here in the middle part of the country. CSV2, well, they're showing us that the central part of the country down here into Texas is going to be well above average, except for the west coast and southeast. Northeast is going to be above average as well. And last but not least, CanSIP's model is showing us, wow, all the monthly models are definitely differing between one another, but West Coast drier than normal, the southern plains into the southwest heading into an above average trend, while the eastern part of the country is going to be drier than normal. So with all the confusion from the monthly models, let's take a look at what the experts have to show us, and I would be in agreement with this. As we can see, from Texas all the way up into the Great Lakes and upper Midwest can be above average. I would definitely be in agreement with that. Florida, unfortunately, it's going to be below normal. Y'all are on a pretty bad drought down there, and hopefully this is not the case, but if we stick with the experts, unfortunately, this is going to be the case. The Southwest and West Coast can be well below average. I would be in agreement with that as well. Equal chances here in the Rockies and Central Plains. So if we head back to the key factors, basically what I would expect is a wetter east and a drier west, with much of the country being well above average as far as temperatures go, which means basically the whole entire country could be warmer than normal. And this could also mean that with a strong ridge in place out west, could mean we could come into an active severe weather pattern here in the middle of the month here out east. So basically wetter east, drier west, hot overall for much of the country for the month of April. Now my bold prediction basically is that we're going to be dealing with a heat dome with temperatures 3 to 6 degrees above average for weeks potentially. Triple digit records could be smashed in the southwest and southern plains, hence why the Climate Prediction Center put well above average temperatures in that region anyway. And we could be dealing with a mid-month severe weather outbreak with tornadoes and large hail in the plains and Midwest, which has been pretty persistent with what all the models have been showing us. So basically spring is going to be turning to full heat and storm season pretty quickly. So basically going to be going from very, very cold to very, very hot really, really quickly, which is going to be resulting in an active severe weather pattern for the month of April. So prepare accordingly, as April is peak severe weather season. Now what about the analog year? Well, this April is going to be looking like it did back in 2017. If y'all are familiar with 2017, there was widespread warmth in the south and west and fast mountain snowmelt. 2017 followed a weak La Niña, which faded to neutral, exactly like what this April is going to resemble, which brought warmth to the south and west and an active severe weather season for the plains. As you can see, this setup matches pretty perfectly as a similar pattern is expected. So if you stayed this far in the video, I'd like to thank y'all. Here's some facts and folklore that you either knew or even not knew. Here's some simple facts about April. Severe the season ramps up. Gulf moisture meets cool air, y'all already know. Prime tornado and big time hail in the plains in the Midwest typically occurs in this month. Big transition month, late frost north, first heat wave south. And here are some of the dates of when you could expect your last frost. And of course the bird migration as well. Now April often brings first widespread severe storms as jet stream activates. Now on to some folklore. April showers typically bring May flowers. More early rain helps crops and grass grow strong. And unfortunately the grass needs mowed here, but it's too darn wet out there to mow it because it keeps on raining. And unfortunately it's looking like the month of April is going to be much of the same story here, at least out east anyway. Now a cold April the barn will fill means cooler and wetter early means that better crop yields later. Now if it thunders on All Fool's Day, which is on April 1st, which is April Fool's Day as well, it brings good crops of corn and hay. And rain before 7, fine before 11 means morning showers, clear by midday. Now this one I'm not too familiar with, but I included it anyways. Y'all may know this one, but March'll search ye, April try ye, May'll tell whether live or die ye. I'm thinking this is probably related to crops, more likely. So I hope each and every one of y'all enjoyed this April outlook. If you did, please make sure you hit that like and share button so more folks are informed about the weather. Also, leave me some feedback in the comment section down below, as any feedback helps provide you, the viewer, better and more informative content in the future. And also, if you haven't done so already, please hit that subscribe button down below, as at Here Always Weather we try to make weather forecasting fun and informative. So basically what I would expect for the month of April is basically it's going to be pretty soggy out east, pretty dry out west, but overall much of the country is going to be warmer than normal. Now this don't mean that the whole month is going to be warm, it just means that overall it'll be warmer than average. Basically one week it could be warm, next week it could be cool, but overall be warmer than normal. And this could also mean that severe weather season could start ramping up drastically for the month of April, so definitely be on guard for that, as April is peak severe weather season. So again, enjoy your April. May all those April showers bring you some May flowers. And as always, make sure you like, comment, and subscribe. And until next time, never stop forecasting.